will now be recorded.
Okay, ready to go. I'd like to call to order the Finance and Personnel Committee meeting for Tuesday, August 6th, 16th, 2022. Roll call, please.
Tracy Flukie,
Here.
Tom Self,
Here.
Chris Serble,
Here.
Kelly Service,
Here.
and then Allison Burnett is remote.
Here, thank you.
Okay, please stand for Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And please keep the men and women that are protecting our country, home and abroad, in your thoughts and prayers, please. Action on the agenda.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All approved, say aye.
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 Motion passes. Action on minutes, the Finance and Personnel Committee regular meeting from July 19th.
Move to approve.
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Approved unanimously. Comments from the public must be limited to items not on the agenda, must state name and address, limited to 5 minutes. Board's role is to listen and not discuss the item. Personal issues cannot be discussed, nor individual names. Board is not able to take action at this meeting. We've got nobody here, and it doesn't look like anybody on the interweb. So we'll move on. Action items. 7A, employee position descriptions, compensation plan, and performance appraisals. Joel.
Yes, thank you, Chris. So members of the committee, what we're looking at tonight is attempting to get some feedback from the committee level before we continue marching down a certain path from an administrative human resources point of view. And it's directly related to the tasks that we've identified in our strategic plan as it relates to position descriptions, employee compensation programs, and then also performance appraisals. So in your packet tonight was kind of a detailed memo on a process that we're working towards. And so we're really kind of at this point, not necessarily looking for formal approval, but feedback that we are kind of going down the correct path. And if so, then we will continue to march forward with our efforts so that we can eventually come back to the committee, in all likelihood, in the month of September, and get approval on position descriptions and employee matrix for compensation and a performance appraisal program. So that's really why we're looking tonight at this particular element. So administration and HR have been working conjunctively to develop a program. Just kind of walk you through where we're at in the process. So we are currently reviewing and drafting position descriptions for every position at the Village of Ashwaubenon. We're probably about 75% of the way through all of those position descriptions. We have a couple departments that we need to finish up. They're really kind of in draft form, and we just need to basically sit down with employees of each job class and review the job description for accuracy. So it's been a pretty involved process. It started with administration, involved HR. Each department head has had an opportunity to provide draft job descriptions from their department. We're reviewing those, compiling them, updating them, making them modern, if you will, sending them back to the department. Each department head then reviews that, should be meeting with their employees or within each employee class, if you will, reviewing them for accuracy and then providing feedback to us for finalization. And then at that point, it would come back to committee for review and approval. From there, the position description is really the basis for developing both a compensation program and a performance appraisal program, because we have a set standard then that we can evaluate for compensation and a set standard then that we can evaluate for performance. And that's really the basis for it. So once the position descriptions are finalized, our plan is to take those position descriptions, apply them to some job criterias, and in the memo we identify 8 specific job criterias that will be used to evaluate that position in order to place that into a wage and compensation matrix, is what we'll call it. I will back up just a moment and just indicate that, or iterate that, right now we do not have a formal compensation program for any of our employees outside of public safety. Public safety does have a real formal, structured compensation program, primarily devised under the terms of the collective bargaining agreement, but then also with the public safety supervisors in order to avoid compression issues between being a represented employee and then maybe getting a promotion into a lieutenant position. We wanted to make sure that we minimize compression issues between those two ranks of employees. But beyond that, for most part, the villages, like the village office positions, we have many unique positions. Not one of them is necessarily the same. There are a few exclusions to that. But as an example, we only have one accountant. We only have one financial analyst. We only have one deputy clerk. The exceptions to that would be like building inspector. We have 2 building inspectors, so they're kind of unique. Beyond that, when you look at our field employees in public works and parks and recreation, that is really the bulk of where we might have multiple people working in a same or similar position. So the village has been afforded the opportunity to kind of evaluate wages on an individual basis. But when we do that, we oftentimes take into consideration the individual holding that position. And sometimes that can create situations of unfairness, favoritism, and things of that nature, and may discriminate against things that could be considered a protective class, such as age, sex, gender, so on and so forth. And so what we would like to do with this particular program is to try to increase or improve upon the objectivity of the compensation program. So it's based on the position and not the person holding the position. And I know that's sometimes different in the private sector because you have much more measurable things. Ultimately, in the public sector, unless it's certain positions, it can be relatively difficult to measure output because we're a service-based industry and it can be difficult that way. So you're really focused on the position, its roles and responsibilities, and how competitive that compensation would be in a similar or like position in another municipality. So that kind of gives you some foundational understanding of that.
Joel, can I interrupt you here?
Absolutely.
A couple things before we move on. One was, and you kind of addressed it, that in the packet we got, it mentioned that it's been a performance evaluation process updated several times over the past years. What have we done before that I know we're changing a lot now, but how did we address this before? And the other thing you mentioned a couple times, compression issues. I'm not sure what compression issues means.
So like a compression, so I'll answer the latter question first and then go back to the other one because it's a little bit a meatier conversation. But the compression issues would be you have a lower level tiered position. So let's say a public safety officer, and under the union contract, they are afforded increases in wages at a rate that is guaranteed under the collective bargaining agreement. As a supervisory staff, you're no longer represented by the collective bargaining agreement, and so your wages are subject to approval of the village board. And so sometimes, and often cases, the rate of increase for a represented employee is different than that of a supervisor. And so if the rate for a collected or for a represented employee increases higher than the rate of a non-represented employee, it creates this compression. So if I'm an officer and I take a promotion to a lieutenant, I should expect a higher wage because I have more responsibility and more to do. And so if that compression occurs, it's no longer enticing compensation-wise for that employee to take that promotion, because why would I take on the extra responsibility for equal or similar pay?
Right, okay.
So we're trying to avoid that compression and show the difference based on the responsibilities of the position versus how we're approving those increases. How we've, and thank you for that question, how we've been doing it in the past. So 2 things. One, the last time that to my knowledge anyway, that the village really kind of looked more comprehensively at wages was back in 2018, roughly. But it was really kind of designated employees. There might have been a dozen or so positions that were reviewed as part of that compensation study, primarily department heads and maybe some very specific specialized positions. And they were afforded substantial increases in wages based on the outcomes of that study, but it did not take into account all positions within the village of Ashwaubenon. And as I mentioned before, because we have positions that are relatively unique to one another, in the past, traditionally, the only time you really review a wage is when somebody leaves the position. So as an example, we had a resignation for our finance about, I don't know what, maybe a year ago or so. And so when that position becomes available, we review it, we analyze it, and then we verify and validate that the wage is competitive for like positions. And that's really the only time that happens. What we'd like to do is kind of remove ourselves from that. Of course, we'll do that with each opening that occurs, but we're doing it within the structure and framework of the matrix versus just the individual position. So again, creating fairness and equity within each of the positions.
Right.
So hopefully I answered
Oh, yeah.
your question.
Yeah,
Good.
very much. Thank you.
So again, what we'd like to do is take these position descriptions once they're approved and weight them against those 8 job criteria factors. So we're looking at knowledge and education, experience, the complexity of the job, supervision exercise, the supervision that is received, and based on the hierarchy of the organization, what kind of consequences can be derived from their decision making, how accountable do they need to be based on the decisions they make. So as a custodian, for example, the consequences of their decision is kind of insulated, if you will, to that of, let's say, the director of public works, right? So they're going to be maybe talked to about not cleaning the toilets properly, but generally speaking, it's the director of public works that is accountable then for the fact that that employee did not perform up to standard.
Joel, can you
Yep.
explain real quick the difference between supervision exercise and supervision received?
Sure. The supervision exercise is really based on how many and who that individual position supervises. So that's a supervision exercised. Supervision received is based on the hierarchy of that position within the organizational structure, recognizing that the more directly reporting you are to, let's say, a department head or a village manager, the importance of that role within the structure of the organization.
So with supervision exercise, that would be more of a department head and have several employees underneath them. The 10% weighing to me seems light on that. And how did you guys come up with all the different weights for everything?
Sure. So this is that matrix I'm kind of showing on the screen, and this is in your packet as well. And so you can kind of see based on the points that you have, and we can certainly adjust the point scale for that particular position. So as an example, under supervision received, that's on that kind of right column on the top. What you end up getting is that's weighted at a 10, so 10%. And then based on what level they have as far as supervision received, they have score 7 points or 1 point. And so if, as an example, my position, I report directly to the board, and I have relatively significant latitude to perform my duties. So my supervision received is pretty minimal, right? So I get 7 points for that. I multiply that by 10, and now I have 70 points for that provision. I think what we looked at as far as the position goes, knowledge education, and again, not just focused on education itself, but the equivalence thereof with knowledge, experience, and job complexity are kind of foundational elements Certainly job supervision of peers, supervision received, things of that nature are important, but we just looked at those top 3 at 20% weighting as kind of those foundational aspects of any position. Because again, you might have situations where a position has very little supervision, but has minimal education or job requirements. And so it's a weighted system, and we wanted to make sure we didn't overemphasize one area based off of those foundational elements.
I really like this proposed system. I think it's extremely all-encompassing. The only thing I had a question on that maybe hasn't even been thought out yet would be these 8, weighted areas that are up on the screen right now and in the packet. Do you imagine or envision that during the recruitment process that candidates would also be weighted with these, and see kind of how they align with the position opportunity? So it'd be really just a fully data-driven process versus kind of taking out some of the emotion and maybe some of the bias that happens in recruiting to ensure that you're really just working with a formulaic approach, very data driven?
We certainly could, and we could modify this to be more applicable or appropriate for the recruitment process and evaluation of candidates. Some of these are obviously pretty static and concrete, as far as like supervision exercise, supervision received, but certainly could tailor it and twist it to a point where, okay, did this candidate supervise 4+ subordinates, and as a result of that experience, they'll get extra 4 points or something to that effect. Certainly. We haven't gotten there yet, but that's certainly a component that we could use to help create that recruitment tool as far as evaluating talent coming in.
I really liked it too. I mean, this is a very extensive, impressive project, I think. I just had 2 concerns. One is who can see all these values and everything? Can everybody who's employed here see?
So a couple things. One, obviously this wage and salary matrix, if this were to be adopted, this matrix itself would be public record, of course, would be publicly accessible in any way, shape, or form.
So in your experience, is there any disincentive to people, because like they can figure out, well, I could work here for 30 years and I'm never going to make more than blah, blah, blah on there? Or is that not, or is it comforting to people to know this is where I'm headed? Or
well, certainly
Can I chip in quick with like my experience with that having worked in public sector? We had a wage grade system like this that was made available to every single employee. It didn't have employee names on it, but it had position titles and what grade they were in. It was actually really well received. People thought it was refreshingly transparent. And my only grudge was that we did not make it available to candidates if they asked for it when they were applying. But I think it's actually the opposite. It takes the mystery out. Yes, maybe you can see where you'll cap out, but it's really refreshing to see this is where I'm starting and this is where I could go. And we're public servants. It is the public's business and kind of everyone's business what we make if we're taxpayer funded. That's just my experience having worked in an organization that had a document like this.
Yeah, and I echo Allison's comments based on my experience in the public sector as well. I think, as Allison had pointed out, as a public sector employee, that your salary is subject to public disclosure. Although we certainly don't necessarily just start flippantly advertising what everybody individually is making, it is an accessible public record. With that, I echo again Allison's comment that that's one of the reasons why we developed this kind of more structured system, because it is transparent and people know, okay, if I continue to perform in a satisfactory manner, I am subject to increases as I gain experience and longevity, if you will. We don't personally offer longevity pay to our employees. We used to. That's since been kind of rescinded, if you will, from a policy standpoint. This is a form of that in essence, because if you continue to perform, you'll be able to advance in step and continue to increase wage over a 15-step process. The opposite of that, and we did evaluate this as an opportunity as well, is really kind of creating a step system or matrix through maybe the first 6 or 8 steps, up to 8 steps. And then after the 6th or 8th step, you get a pay for performance increase. So you'd have a structured step point to step 6 or 8, and then after that, it was open-ended to the position maximum wage. And why we elected to go this route versus the latter, or the former, I should say, is it became very subjective after step 6 or 8. How do you create a system that then is fair, that everybody's going to get an equal step for equal work, even though everybody is doing a very different position? So this creates it fair across the board for the position, and it's objective, and it refrains from that kind of subjective review year over year. I've worked in different environments that have had very structured step systems like this, and ones where you have a pay for performance component, and it's difficult for employees, especially when you're starting to create comparatives between yourself and, let's say, a peer. So as an example, I had a peer department head that had a higher level responsibility position, so they were getting paid more per year. But at the end of the day, I outperformed them. So let's say I got a 4% raise and I was doing their work because they were underperforming. They got a 2% raise because they were underperforming, but their value of their raise was more than mine because their base wage was higher. So it creates a lot of subjectivity and animosity and angst. So that's kind of one of the big reasons why we went with this approach of a very structured pay scale.
I understand the value of the objectivity and being able to point at, you can see, you can do the math. We'll show you our worksheet, and you can see what you need to improve on and what you did well at, blah, blah, blah. My other question is, are you confident that there's enough flexibility in this system to reward the superstars? Because you don't want to lose them.
Right.
Is there any way to, because there's some people that you can't objectively quantify what it is about them that's so amazing, but they have something. And
Right.
You're like, we got to keep this guy or this gal.
Yeah, absolutely. Within the policy, as it'll be written, there is flexibility for, let's say, a department head or even village manager to suggest, and at that point, if it exceeds the policy language, that the board would then be able to authorize the increase beyond a step or to a different level. Certainly have had that. We had a very similar system in my prior community, and that was written into the policy that, let's say we had an exceptional performer, the administrator manager would like, or a department head would like to recommend that this employee, because they far exceeded the expectations for their position, they would be afforded to, let's say, advance 2 steps or 3 steps based on that performance. The other component, as it's indicated in the memorandum, is also this kind of merit, this hybrid merit program that provides kind of one-time lump sum bonuses to employees based on a pool. So how that system would work is that would be in addition to this wage matrix. And ultimately what would happen is annually, if the board allowed for it, would allocate X number of dollars into a pool, if you will, based on a percentage of total wages spent based on the budget year. So in the example in the memorandum, I think I had indicated $50,000. So let's say annually the village board elects to pool $50,000 for this merit pay program. After evaluations have been completed and employees are ranked based on their appraisal, they could be subject to receiving that one-time lump sum bonus based on their evaluation criteria. And it would get broken down based on that budgeted amount of $50,000. The board elects to put in $20,000, well then those values decrease obviously, and everything stays within the allocated amount that the board adopts. This is reviewed annually. There's no guarantee that the board would allocate the funding towards it. Some years are harder than others. In prior communities that I've worked in that have had this program, it's all based on the fund balance that is remaining from the prior fiscal year. So if there's fund balance, as an example, last year we had a little over, I think, $200,000 in fund balance. say $50,000 we're going to put into the merit pay program, and then the other remaining balance is going to get allocated into some other type of reserve fund. And that's kind of how they did it. So it wasn't necessarily budgeted, but if the village did well financially in that fiscal period, then they would put money into that program and it would support that effort. So, and again, this is kind of, although it is somewhat subjective in nature because it's directly tied to the performance appraisal process, because it's difficult to get fully away from a subjective review, of course. It does make it objective from the standpoint of manager and board involvement, because the board and the village has allowed for lump sum one-time bonuses to employees, but not to, that opportunity hasn't always been offered or afforded to every single employee. And so this program would create that structure so that you could do that.
So that, okay, just to clarify, and I think I understand now, after going over this at first, I thought maybe there was two options, but these are actually two separate, what's the word I want to use, ideas or objectives, but one stacked on the other one.
Right.
So
correct.
it's not necessarily
So
picking one over the other. Okay.
Correct. The foundational element would be the wage and salary matrix. Employees would be placed into a grade based on their position. So their position description would place them into the matrix. That would be the standard foundational component. If the board elects to fund the lump sum merit bonus pool, then that money would be divided out based on kind of the policy criteria that are identified in addition to any step changes that that employee may achieve as a result of their continued work.
Right. Okay.
So just structurally, how this would be rolled out, if the committee and board agree that this is the approach that we would go, ultimately each position would be evaluated. It would be placed into the matrix and scored based on the position description. And then ultimately, we would have an idea of what grade they would be at. So some employees, as an example, let's say we have a water and sewer utility operator, and they make currently $29.10 per hour. And hypothetically speaking, they grade out at grade 6, okay? And they're currently at $29.10 per hour. So if you look at the wage matrix under grade 6, step 7 says, if I have my right line, $28.79, so they're above that. And then step 8 would be $29.37, so they're below that. So how we would place them into the grade is we would afford them the opportunity to go to that next step higher than their current wage. So they would be placed into the matrix under step 8, regardless of their year of experience or anything to that effect, right? We don't want to diminish current employees' wages. We want to just get them appropriately located within the grade and the step at the wage that they're at. And so that's how we structurally enter into the program. So there is an opportunity for a slight lift in wages for each employee because we'd be eking them to that next highest appropriate step based on their current wage. What we would do with new employees then, however, is they would get hired in at that hiring range. And the way the policy would be written is that the department head, village manager would have authority within the policy to hire employees within that hiring range. So step 1 through step 6. We would not necessarily need authorization to hire within that range, but that's what's afforded to us. And that would be based on the candidates, their experience, their knowledge, so on and so forth, their current salary. It's all part of that negotiation effort. However, if we wanted to hire an employee beyond the hiring range, we could do that, but that would require village board authorization. So we have a high quality candidate we want to bring in here. Let's say their current wage is, use an example, our public works director position that we're currently in the recruitment process for. The hiring range is, let's say, up to $106 or just under $107,000. That's step 6. This candidate's currently making $107,000 at their current employer. So we want to try to bring them in under our fold. we would have to exceed the hiring range as allowed by policy and get approval from the village board to say, yeah, we're going to exceed that and go to that next step or the next step after that to recruit this candidate. So you have flexibility in the hiring, but it may require additional authorization from the board to say, yeah, this candidate is definitely worth it. Okay. Okay, just really again, real quickly, structurally wise, we have 15 grades, 15 steps. Each step within each grade is a 2% lift over the prior step. So it's a 2% for 15 steps. And that's consistent across the entire matrix. And so what that means is that each year under this program, employees would be afforded at a minimum, so long as they meet satisfactory performance, a 2% increase. And that's the foundational element. Now, we also recognize that we need to update the matrix then from time to time to reflect cost of living increases and things of that nature. So we just have to be cognizant of that. So as it would be written into the policy is annually, generally speaking in August or July, we would review, and I'm sorry, I pulled ahead here. We would review the Bureau of Labor Statistics cost of CPI calculator. And it would tell us kind of all goods was, let's say, a 3% increase year over year. Now we know this year is really bad, right? 8.5 or 9.1%. But typically we're looking at a 2 or 3% increase. There's no guarantee that the village board would approve this. This is a discretionary decision by the board annually to say, okay, our CPI was 3%. We're going to apply that 3% to the matrix. So it doesn't necessarily get applied to all the employees individually, but it gets applied to the base wage of the matrix. So that 3% would apply to the minimum step, and then that carries forward through the matrix at a 2% lift year over year. So if the board were to do that, let's say increase the matrix by CPI, which theoretically is 3%, that would mean an employee would get a 5% increase from the prior year. So that's a pretty healthy and substantial and robust increase for those employees. Again, that's a discretionary decision by the board. Certainly in times of high inflation and things like that, and we want to maintain a competitive job market, you may be more inclined to increase that. Maybe when inflation isn't quite as pressuring and maybe employees, the employee situation is maybe a little bit more promising for the employer, maybe you'd delay or you'd wait on that increase. Bear in mind that the longer you wait on increasing based on CPI, the further you will become compartmentalized and uncompetitive with your competition. So it's important to stay in line with it as best as you can. Recognizing though, board has discretion and has the ability to adjust based on the financial situation of the village too. Okay, so that's kind of the matrix, that's kind of the setup and the administration of the matrix itself. I guess if there's any additional questions about the grades, the step system, implementation of that, how that relates to position descriptions, I'll pause for that. And then we'll talk briefly about the performance appraisal process afterwards.
Who is going to implement this? I mean, is this something you're going to do internally, or a consultant come in and help us go through this? Because one of the concerns, it's not a concern, but as I'm reading through this, is the analysis of the job factors in the position and not the performance of the current employee. If you're involved in day-to-day operations, it's sometimes hard to step back. Mm-hmm.
So it'll be primarily Ann from HR, from our HR consulting group, myself, and then department heads as we're reviewing those position descriptions. It'll be a collaborative effort to place employees within the appropriate step based on those grading criteria. It should remain relatively objective based on the position itself. There is a component in this grading system. So here's an example of how we would do that. Here's a few sample positions that we've recently hired in the last year that I just theoretically put in here based on what we know their current job description to be. So you can see it's pretty objective. It's straightforward. So as the village attorney, they require a JD, so a Juris Doctorate degree. We know that's a high point scale. We know that they require X number of years of experience. We know that that's going to score high. Their job complexity is pretty substantial. They're dealing with all sorts of different legal issues. That's high. Work environment, as an example, unless they're running around the office with scissors, it's a pretty safe work environment. So that's scored a 1. So that's down. So it's pretty objective when you start to just look at the position description and you remove yourself from the person. They get points, they get set in the grade, and they're set. What we're looking at is kind of having 3 people review this, the department head, HR, and myself, so that if there's a disagreement on how we're viewing, let's say, the responsibilities of the position and the complexity of it, we can have a discussion and come to a consensus and agree on that. I will point out, I did not mention this, that there is an opportunity within the matrix itself that is subjective, and that's called the market adjustment. So from time to time, we may have situations where a position itself scores at a certain grade, but we know based on our review and analysis of other competitive positions that wage for that table may not necessarily align. So there is an opportunity to add score or add points to that total score to give it a lift into a higher grade, even though that position may not necessarily align. And so we have that capability. That can happen from time to time, certainly. If you start to get into a position where 10% or better of your positions require some kind of market adjustment to be competitive, your matrix needs to have a full, thorough review to get it up to where it should be. So as an example, I just put a couple positions in there that would have that adjustment so you can kind of see that. Okay, any other questions on the matrix?
I really like where we're going with this. It's forward thinking, I think, and great for really good for the village. But the subjective part for me might be, you're going to have the department heads evaluating, right? It's all human elements, personality clashes, things are going to happen. How do we minimize that? How do we make it as much as possible an even playing field from department to department?
Right. So yeah, that's probably more related to the performance appraisal process, right? I think that's your question. Yeah. So if we kind of go to that section of the packet, there's an example document. So somewhat similar to what we're doing now, we do an electronic evaluation system where a supervisor evaluates their employee based on a 5-point scale. There's not a whole lot of criteria, however, that the supervisor uses in evaluating that, and that's where that subjective nature comes into play. You might have one supervisor. Public safety is a really good example of that, where you have 3 supervisors for each shift. All of them may be involved in the evaluation process to some degree. And then you have PSOs, all of which, we have different PSOs for each shift. So every PSO might get something kind of different from an evaluation standpoint, different criteria. And obviously that's what we're trying to avoid. So 2 things: foundationally, developing a form and a process that is a little bit more in depth, that establishes specific criteria that would then get you that score. So trying to create some objectivity for it. So as an example, if you look at, it would be page 15 in your packet, you have these behavioral job performance criteria. So under teamwork, creates and fosters positive work environment. And a lot of this has to do with training from HR to kind of work through these supervisors so that they know what they're doing, okay? So a 3 is kind of that base level. That's meeting expectation. A 1 would mean we're in trouble. A 5 would mean we have exceptional performance. And my recommendation and HR's recommendation would be, as a manager, if I'm evaluating, let's say you or another employee, I would start at the 3 and I would read the criteria. So if the subject matter is teamwork and positive work environment, I would look at this. Okay, is this employee positive in attitude and demeanor? Again, it's somewhat subjective, but that's what we're looking for. Are they even-tempered? Do they tolerate difficult solutions without hindering work performance? Are they willing to assist? So on and so forth. If that supervisor can say yes to that entire criteria, then we move to step 4. And then we read step 4. Okay, do they do this? And if the question is, yeah, not all the time, then what I would recommend, and I'm a little bit stiffer on the evaluation, I would say you're a 3. You're a solid 3. So that's where you go. Notice we don't have a 3-5 or in between. Either you're wholly in or you're wholly out kind of thing. So you're in. And likewise, so if you read all 4, you would move to 5. And so then you'd read 5. And if you're not all of 5, then you're a 4. And that's okay. The goal is to try to be a 3 or better in every single category. And likewise, if you start at 3 and you read that, like, boy, I don't know if I could agree to that for that particular employee, I'm going to read box 2. And then I'd say, yeah, that's kind of how I'm feeling right now for that particular criteria. Again, somewhat subjective, but you have a framework that every employee should be kind of working from, either up or down. Now, with that, let me back up a little bit. The appraisal process is really needs to be, and it's not currently, employee driven. And what I mean by that is we're going to initiate the program with the employee completing a self-assessment of themselves first. So the employee actually conducts their own evaluation, begins a process of evaluating goals that they may have set the prior year, and then also work towards establishing goals for the coming year. And that's the starting point of the evaluation process. We don't necessarily do that today. The employee then submits their evaluation to their supervisor reviews their self-evaluation, and the training and guidance we'll have for those supervisors is complete the evaluation based on your experience with the employee. But then when you sit down and have a conversation with the employee, you're going to have a conversation on the discrepancies you have between how they evaluated themselves and how you see them. And it's more conversational. It's like, okay, we have a disconnect here. You have an idea that this is your expectation. I have an idea that this is your expectation, and we have a miss. So how can we get this aligned so we have an understanding of what these expectations are for performance? So that's really what it is more about. And then beyond that, it is also a conversation about growth and development. So it's really focused on goal setting, and the employee is the driver of that. What goals do you want to accomplish next year that will not only help you grow professionally and developmentally, but also assist the village in achieving our strategic objectives? So it's really kind of focused more on that. Right now, our process is supervisor evaluates, it's done electronically, it's in some cases just forwarded directly to the employee. There's not a whole lot of conversation and dialogue on those conversations, and sometimes you have employees that have a supervisor that says, you know what, I don't really like the system, I don't have a good cordial conversation with my employees, I'm going to rank them all a 5, so when I send the email out to them that it's distributed, they're happy because they all got 5s. Or you got maybe a more stringent supervisor that says, hey, I don't like this person's attitude, I'm going to score them appropriately because they need to shape up. And then they send out the evaluation, and the employee that is perceived to have a bad attitude just got an evaluation that was really negative. And it doesn't help their attitude, and it doesn't help set those goals. So this process, again, is very employee driven. They're going to evaluate themselves. It's more conversational. It's about growth. It's about development. And it's about aligning how our employees see themselves within the organization, how our supervisors can help get them to a higher degree of performance.
So will the supervisor see the employee's evaluation before they do theirs, or will they come together and each will have done their evaluation and then they'll kind of discuss it?
The employee will complete their self-evaluation before the supervisor completes theirs. And then at that point, they will sit down after the supervisor has conducted their kind of initial assessment.
So
of course, the supervisor is going to have an idea of how they feel about that employee.
Right.
But it's intriguing to see what an individual may evaluate themselves on. In my experience, we've had situations where employees are very hard on themselves and they don't see themselves maybe as a strong contributor, but they are. And then we have had instances where an employee says, hey, I'm all 5.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can say that will tell me otherwise I'm all 5. And in reality, they're like 2 or 3. So it forces you to have that conversation though with your employee to say, hey, we're not lining up here.
Right.
And we need to have that hard conversation about getting aligned. I would say those are the outliers. Most of the employees are pretty accurate about their performance. And ultimately what happens is an employee may have done something exceptional that the employee feels very strongly about. And so they will indicate that on the evaluation. They'll score themselves a 5 and they'll make some notes about, hey, remember when I did this and I saved the village all this money or cut time in half by doing this task. And the manager is so busy evaluating all the other employees, they forgot about it. And here, oh, that's right, they did do that. I was thinking that employee was a 3, but I forgot that they did do that, and that was huge for us. I'm going to increase their score to a 4, let's say, and split the difference. So that happens quite often too in this setup.
So you're going to be going through with your supervisors or anyone that's doing the evaluation, you're going to sit down with them and kind of try to get everybody at least close to the same page. I mean, like Chris said, performance evaluations are subjective by nature. You cannot take the subjectivity out of it. And everybody, like Joel was saying, maybe he's a little harsher and maybe I would be a little easier on an evaluation. It's just the nature of the process, and you're not going to get away from that no matter what. Mm-hmm. But I think good training for your supervisors to keep it as consistent as it can will help with that subjectivity at least
I guess
a little bit.
Oh, go ahead.
No,
I guess that's kind of where I was kind of heading was if you take this merit pay pool, if that would go through. Now you've got different department heads and one might be a real tough evaluator and another one might not be. Well, that's going to affect this merit pay, from one employee, from one department to another, potentially. How do you try to get away from that? I guess my question was, are we going to, is HR going to, are we going to do some kind of basic training with all the department heads? Just kind of say, hey, this is how this has to, are we going to address that?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly some training on the front end as far as the process, the self-evaluation, kind of what that baseline evaluation step process would be, as I kind of described, kind of start at box 3, work your way up or down. Now, the evaluation form that I provided is for kind of a general employee. Supervisors, let's say in public safety, would want something that's very specific and tailored to public safety. We could still target the same behavioral traits, but the descriptions as to what each performance number means could be drafted to reflect the nature of that type of work. So this is kind of a template to work from, so everybody would be working from the same template and same process. So yes, definitely training, kind of walking through that, again, focusing the fact that this is a conversational opportunity between supervisor and employee helps. Beyond that, what I've done before in the past with a similar system, and I'm not recommending that here, is to have, as an example, in my prior community, smaller employee pool, I reviewed the evaluations after the department had completed them, just to make sure that they were being consistent between their employees. We can certainly do the same thing here. I wouldn't recommend me doing it, but I would recommend HR maybe doing some audits of employees and just kind of walking through it to see if there are some consistencies or inconsistencies and helping address that before the final evaluation is submitted to the employee.
I think that's a good idea,
Yeah.
especially for the first time you're doing the new system, and you could easily say it's because it's the first time.
Right, right.
So I love the idea of the employee doing a self-evaluation, especially starting a new system evaluate, but every year, that's great.
Yeah.
Can I clarify, we are going to be, or the supervisor are going to be evaluating our officers too, even though they are a union? Or is that part of this process?
Currently, PSOs do get evaluated from their supervisors. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Oh, I
they
didn't know
currently
that.
do. Yeah,
Okay.
and that's the other thing too. I'll mention. So in public safety, they do semi-annual evaluations. My suggestion here is that this is the minimum foundational element. So we would do this once per year with our employees. Now, supervisors may elect, and we can certainly encourage them to do evaluations or quarterly check-ins on goals. There's a kind of a somewhat new term called stay interviews, where every like 3-4 months you meet with your employees and you talk to them about how you want them to stay in the organization and kind of engage with them. It's an engagement tool. That's an opportunity. This is just simple foundational stuff. So once per year, every employee should be afforded an opportunity to meet with their supervisor, discuss goals and development and performance, and that's what this tool is. But if an employee or a supervisor would like to do that more often, every quarter, every 6 months, they're welcome to do that, but it should be based on that same foundational component, that this is an employee-driven effort to try to grow, develop, and improve performance with that employee. And of course, it probably should be said, this is just an appraisal tool. So if we're experiencing poor performance, that shouldn't show up per se in the evaluation as an introductory piece, meaning the employee should know before the appraisal that we're having performance issues. It may be a reiteration of those performance issues in the evaluation, but it should come as no surprise to the employee, because those conversations should have happened separately and more direct and succinct outside of that. So we're not waiting until 12 months to tell an employee that they're not doing a good job. They should have known that earlier and have put together some type of improvement plan to improve that performance before getting the appraisal.
Excuse me, I just have a comment about this incentive pay. They should be incentives and not, I know this is for illustration purposes, but it says that, most of the employees meet expectations will get a bonus. After 3 or 4 years, they're going to expect that bonus every year. And that might not be the case. It's kind of like not an incentive anymore. It's like part of their salary. And that's why I'm just concerned that you overdo that part of it. Just because they meet expectations doesn't mean you get a bonus.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and again, that pool program would only be funded under the discretion of the board. Again, my recommendation would be primarily based on if there's fund balance left at the end of the year. And that fund balance indicates, hey, the village had a successful year. We managed costs, we improved our revenue situation, so we're in the black, if you will, at the end of the year. And that could be the direct result of our employees' efforts to some degree. So, that would be the indication that there's going to be an award. Or some type of pool to draw from. Certainly, we can adjust the policy too that says, only would employees that score 4 or better, that kind of exceeds expectations or exceptional, are eligible for the merit pay. Certainly can do that as well. So then that really drives that.
yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. So that can be tailored appropriately.
I think, to your point, Tom, and it's addressed in here a couple times, but maybe not emphasized enough. But as a village, part of the village's responsibility is to make sure the employees, I think, remain challenged, the ones that want to be challenged, and there's incentive to them to work towards if you want to call it promotions or whatever. That's been brought up here a couple times, and maybe that's something that needs to be emphasized a little bit more to keep them motivated and driven, not just stagnant in one place expecting a reward for that,
Right.
but to move up the chain, the chain in the village.
And I will also mention on that hybrid merit pay program, so evaluation is completed, let's say that employee exceeded expectations or was exceptional, the department head has to recommend that employee for participation in the merit pool program. And in all likelihood, what we would have is some type of recommendation form for the department head to provide that recommendation, but also identify why they're recommending it. So what did that employee do that was exceeding expectation or exceptional? in all likelihood, that's going to be derived from their goals, right? They establish kind of a goal for themselves or for the organization that they wanted to achieve. They achieve that. As a result of that achievement, X benefit happened for themselves or for the village, and that's the justification behind it. So there's some documentation to back up that effort.
Joel, you might have lightly touched on it before. As some of our staff, moves up in years and, in experience, what in here is going to keep them motivated? Because something always caps out. I think we got a cap in here. And it's not always money. But I just got reminded because I know my dad was in management, worked in the paper mill industry for years, and I remember in his last, as a production manager, his last number of years, I remember him telling me that, when he'd hire somebody, that a lot of times he'd prefer taking somebody that maybe only had 10 years left, compared to a younger person that you would think maybe had 30 years or so, or 40 years possibly with the company, but that 10 years that experienced guy was going to give him were going to be 10 premium years. How do we keep that? How do we keep that person?
Yeah, good question. So let's say we have a 15-year employee that started at the implementation of this, so they've hit that max. So we really got 15 steps. So there's kind of 15 years if they start at the minimum level to work that way forward. So there's two approaches that you can take. One, obviously the table's going to get adjusted periodically for CPI. So even if they're at that max step, they could potentially see an increase based on that CPI increase that the village board had adopted. So that, again, that's another key component to always trying to maintain that CPI increase, to maintain the competitiveness of the matrix. So they should see some increases. Second to that, and this is probably more afforded to more line staff and things of that nature, maybe not your department heads, but your line staff. As an example, you might have a parks maintenance worker 1, and they're going to be at grade 4. And you might have a park maintenance worker 2, and they're going to be at a grade 5. And so you might create tiers within a similar position and add maybe, in order to get them to score higher on the matrix, you would say, well, you need at least 10 years of experience. So now you're going to get that many more points. You're going to increase your grade, and now you're going to move up another step, if you will, or another grade, if you will, to get that higher wage. So there's ways to kind of create that within the structure to give employees that may have been here a long time that are redlined to that point. That brings up an interesting point too that I forgot to mention earlier. So one of the conditions that we have right now that's challenging is we have, in particular, like public works or parks maintenance, if they get hired on, there's really kind of an 18-month window where they advance from their hiring wage to their kind of post-probationary wage to their final wage. So they could get hired on at one wage, after 18 months hit this, after 2 years hit their final wage. So we have employees in public works that are at a wage that have been here 20 years or better that are making the same amount that an employee that's been here 24 months is making. And so many of them feel that that's not fair either. And that's kind of the basis for some of this matrix as well, that you got enough space between a new hire and somebody that's been here 15 plus years, so you don't have, again, those compression issues of these new hires with veterans, if you will.
So explain that. How is that solved?
So it's not going to fix the problem we have right now. You know, we'll have 24-month employees that, even when they get implemented into this matrix, are going to be making what the other employees that have been here 20 years are making. That doesn't fix where we're at today, but any new hires coming in, that will help solve that compression issue because they'll be hired in at the hiring wage, and it will take several years to get to that point that those veterans have been at for a period of time.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so that's kind of it in a nutshell. I guess probably more than a single nutshell, but there's a lot there. I guess I'll certainly answer any other questions that you have, but it sounds like based on feedback from the committee that we're moving in a right direction and we should continue to formalize and bring something forward. Unless anyone has any other feedback, that's kind of the gist that I'm getting.
No, I think you did a really good job on this. I appreciate all the information and the advantages and disadvantages listed for each of the different processes. So I think it sounds like a good plan. I like Tom's and Kelly's comments on, dang it, now I lost my train of thought. What were you hitting on? Sorry, I just drove from St. Louis today, so my brain's not working real good. You guys had a good one. Now, what the heck was it?
The incentives being.
Yes, starting with a 4 rather than a 3. I think that's a really good idea. Because, if they're at 3, they're doing their job, but at the minimum level. So I think going with a 4 or 5 to be part of the merit increase would be a good way to do that.
And I will mention again, I know I stated in the memo, this is primarily, this matrix is going to be established for all full-time, part-time, permanent positions within the village, with the exception of public safety. Obviously, public safety represented employees are governed under the collective bargaining. The public safety supervisors are, their matrix is determined based on the collective bargaining agreement and the separation to refrain from compression. But any other, like our financial analyst, our village attorney, all the positions within Village Hall, field staff, they would all be incorporated into a similar matrix. We do have a line in the matrix that's reserved for LTEs and seasonal positions. That will be, again, a separate kind of pay scale plan that will likely not include 15 steps and so on and so forth. So it'll be scaled based on our current structure. And those will be coming back to committee and board as well for review.
Okay. I like the way this is going. Yeah, I'm impressed.
It seems it's gonna reward I shouldn't say reward, it's gonna make the compensation for the people who should have the compensation. It's gonna rate the job descriptions too, which I think is a good idea. I think the whole plan is a good idea.
What are other communities doing? Are other communities doing similar things to this? Or what was where did this idea come from, Joel?
Well, I'll be honest. We developed a very similar program in my prior community of Greenville, so it's very, very, very similar to that. But we had a very similar situation down there as we do here, as far as evaluation programs and kind of subjective compensation reviews and things of that nature. So what we did down there, and similarly here, and what we're kind of reviewing and validating to make sure it's still current and modern, is just reach out to different municipalities of similar size. So City of De Pere, Town of Grand Chute, kind of these communities that are similar size and makeup to Ashwaubenon, and take a look at what they're doing. Many of them have either, as I mentioned before, a very stringent step system. So as an example, Grand Chute has a very similar system to what this is. It's a 15-step process. You get graded out and you get placed in the matrix. De Pere has that other model where it's like 6 steps. I think it's 5 or 6 steps, where you get introduced at that, and then once you hit that period, then you get this pay for performance component up to your max wage, and that is an interesting setup. Very, very subjective, and not one that I thought would be appropriate for our employee pool. So we did not recommend that one, just because it just added, with some of the concerns, I think, with the HR function here, and maybe some concerns with village manager and the role that they play. We wanted to maintain a structured position that has a foundational component to it, and not subjectivity based on the administrator manager in charge.
If you're gonna go ahead to do this, how long do you anticipate this will the process will take until it's fully implemented?
So if, we'll continue to work through those position descriptions and provide a draft, position analysis and grade scale for consideration. I'm hoping for September. I've been saying that for the last 2 months, but it's been a little busy, but hoping to do that. The goal would be, if this is approved, ultimately to incorporate this component into the 2023 budget with implementation starting January 1. So employees would become aware and familiar with this system. We would begin to budget based on and surrounding this system, and then we get everybody engaged into a step based on their position for January 1 start date.
And Joel, will you be evaluated then by the village president? Is that how it'll be set up?
I think what we were doing in the past is, I think Mary was reaching out and getting feedback from the board, and then ultimately from that feedback, an evaluation is completed by Mary and then provided to me.
Okay.
Yep.
I also reached out to the.
So almost like a 360 to a certain degree for the village manager then.
Right.
Okay. Do we need a motion or anything? This is information. And,
Just informational for discussion
Feedback.
purposes
Okay.
only. Yep.
okay. All right. Any other questions or comments for Joe? No. All right. Items for next agenda. Anything other than we need water in the in the break room? I was gonna fill it too, and there was none there. No, I looked in there. Yeah.
Terry just got me one yesterday morning out of it.
In the cupboard? Oh, I opened the door and it's, wow. What's good? You got a water thief. Okay. All right.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn? Yep.
Second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.
This